with this very exciting discussion on what is an extremely hot topic, AI in life sciences. So I think it probably makes sense for us to do some quick intros before we kick off into the grueling questions I've got for the panel. I am, as I've been introduced, a partner and patent attorney. I'm a bit of an interloper. So I'm a physicist by background. So you might be wondering why I'm here at an Helix event. Well, I specialize in protecting software and AI innovation wherever that happens to land. So quite a lot of that could end up being in the life sciences space. So that's why I'm here, not a complete novice to this sort of space. So let's start from my left going on. If you'd like to introduce yourselves, just a sort of quick intro, 30 seconds.
Pleasure. Great to be here. I'm Jürgen Harter. I'm the CEO of the Cambridge Crystallographic Data Center. It's a big global data repository for structural science data. All the small molecules are in there, crystal structures coming from all around the world, tens of thousands of scientists. And we more or less are the guardians of that high-quality data that then finds its use into research and development and manufacturing and materials science, advanced functional materials design, drug design, all that good stuff. So we'll talk about that later. But it's good to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Parminder. Thank you, everyone here. So my name is Sven Sewitz. Excuse me. I am a molecular biologist by background, microbiologist. I work for a company called Genomics, and we focus on analyzing data from the metagenome or the microbiome. So this is already a fairly large data set for any one sample. Hundreds and thousands of bacteria that live in a specific ecosystem. And to understand that, to draw value from it, which could be in drug discovery or in nutrition, we have to integrate other types of data as well. So we're every day challenged with the data complexity issue, and that's one area where we are very keen to understand more and learn and contribute.
Fantastic. Hi, everyone. I'm Zizi, Imatorbhebhe, Managing Director for Bios Health Group. We're a strategic advisory group that's based in the US. And we work with investors and life science companies from end to end. On the investor side, we help them identify companies that they might want to invest in the life science space. And on the life science side, we help life science companies prepare for getting money from investors because it's very difficult now. So we help them with their investor preparation, and we also give them access to our BIOS Innovation Circle, which is an ecosystem of various strategic partners that help small to mid-sized life science companies. So I'm glad to be here.
Hi everyone, I'm Steve Baker. I head a data science and artificial intelligence team in AstraZeneca. My team look at developing solutions for improving our clinical trials. I have a PhD in engineering, so my background is actually engineering, and over the last 20 or so years I've worked in lots of consultancy and eventually moving from sort of software to more to data science and artificial intelligence, and 3 years ago I joined AstraZeneca.
Hello, my name is Krzysztof Potempa. I'm the founder and director of BRAINCURES. We essentially apply biological intelligence to enable precision medicine. What I'd say is essentially whatever AI does, biological intelligence does it better. That's waking them up.
It's true. Okay, so just a quick point on questions. I think we're going to take the majority of the questions at the end. So at that point, if you raise your hand or use the online tool to put in your questions, that would be great. But right, so the first question for the panel is, we know, we all are aware that companies are using AI for a variety of things in the life sciences space. So from drug discovery to drug design to modeling how drugs might actually interact with the targets and so on. But also it's being used in more broadly than that, so in sort of the healthcare space, nutrition, and so on. So what are companies doing? Can you give us any examples of what's actually happening already and perhaps any successes that you could share?
Sure, I can start. So AI really has had a lot of application in the life science space, and I think, to think about the life science space, you have to think about the the life science life cycle. So very early on, companies are using AI for identifying targets, because in those, I'm a research scientist by training, but I remember many, many years ago, you always it took time to identify which targets you even wanted to look at, and that takes years to do. So now companies can use AI looking at various data sets like proteomics, genomics, public literature to identify which targets they really want to look at. And then once you identify the targets, then you're looking at drug discovery. You're trying to identify which types of compounds, right, are going to fit that particular target. So they use that in compound development. There are a number of examples that have happened recently. We have Atomwise, I don't know if you know Atomwise, did some work with Charles River, and they used AI to identify targets for a Parkinson's drug. I think it's called Sumarinol. Another company as well did one for OCD drug. So there's that use is also there. AI is also used in the clinical trial space. It's used to identify patients that could be appropriate for a particular clinical trial. Is also used in clinical study design in trying to find the right protocol, the right patient numbers to use, the right endpoints, etc. And then it's also used to give real-time status when you're doing a clinical trial, especially if it's linked to a wearable or ePro or something like that. And then also we use AI for drug repurposing, where you can take existing drugs and use them to find new drugs, and also using pharmacovigilance. So really across the life cycle, AI is really having a lot of impact, and we have known examples of it right now.
That's great.
Yeah, I can go next maybe. So it's already been mentioned. I think it was really good to hear the previous panel on precision oncology, and we see the same thing in precision medicine. And for example, so just a recent success story of one of our collaborators. Of course, our human gut is a central part of our metabolism, and many of our orally, or all of our orally consumed drugs pass through that gut, and they get metabolized in a different way depending on what type of gut microbiome you have. So one of the real interests is to understand potentially before you are subjected to, for example, a cancer trial or a cancer therapy, to understand what that metabolism would do to the drug. And there's often a key difference between responders and non-responders in terms of the gut microbiome composition. So for a lot of companies, this is a focus of interest. You can differentiate different classes of people depending on the constituency of the gut microbiome. And that correlates very strongly, but still in a not completely understood way, which is where the science currently is, to if you respond to a particular treatment or not. Now, of course, people are trying to understand really in a molecular detail, in a molecular mechanistic way, why that is. And you would love to, of course, shift a non-responder to a responder. So these are all areas that are just cutting edge right now, which we cannot yet do. But there's a huge amount of interest in that. And the amassing of the data currently is pointing towards the direction that soon is going to be possible. And I think this gives a real reason of hope for personalized treatment along a number of different indications.
And perhaps to add to things in terms of how AI is used, I mean, first of all, I think it probably would be helpful to go a bit underneath the term AI, because I feel that's a bit too broad. I think there's so many other things underneath, from machine learning, neural nets, to these large language models and all the new technologies, tensor models, you name it. And for example, at the CCDC, we run a discovery suite of software which helps people to do digital drug design, and they can do then docking. They can do high throughput docking, and that runs with genetically optimized algorithms. And now it's also more knowledge enabled by all the structural science data underneath. So it's really driven by the high quality data underneath. And there are a lot of biotechs obviously getting into that, and they're wanting to run this in the cloud in not just 1,000 molecules, but we're looking at millions of molecules, running them through the workflow to dock against your targets, and then figure out the best ones. And I think that's one of the things that, for example, a lot of biotechs are getting into quite strongly at the moment.
So I think, well, it's quite clear that a lot of about a dozen artificial intelligence companies got funded early on are running compounds through the clinic. Still some way to go to know if you could say, probability of success will be any better than pharma's probability of success. I think it's catching up that if you don't have the biology, you're not probably going to have the 1 in 10 success rate or fewer than that at best. And I think also, another angle where I think you could say data science is going to play a big role is essentially scientific wellness, as actually participating in the process of collecting data or going through a GP more often, you could say, for health checkups to see what our healthy baseline is and what our unhealthy baseline is. And I think we've got our Future Health, right? I think is sort of the UK project. And then we've got Lee Hood doing this 84-year-old, the Father of Systems Biology and the P4 Medicine initiative doing, I think, wanting to run over 100 million people, I think. And I think one other thing is sort of, well, essentially I think it's, well, biology is still going to end up being the key. And I think we're still at the stage where we need to generate, I think, cleaner data or data that has asked the question to be able to inform our future health.
I guess I'll finish. So I guess the answer to the question of where is it used is everywhere. It really is everywhere, and it should be everywhere. It's from big things to small things. So my team are looking more at how AI can assist in decision making as opposed to replace it, so that you have the controls of the humans making sure things are right. So it's from AI is very good at summarising large amounts of information, for example, much better than humans, much faster. So the efficiency gains from AI are enormous. It's better at matching data together, putting data together. We're looking at, can we get it to generate our protocols, or at least pieces of them. There's all sorts of things that will make, in my world, executing clinical trials much, much faster.
Well, that's an excellent segue into my next question, because you've mentioned accelerating research, doing things faster than humans can do stuff. So how is AI accelerating research in organizations?
So I think I would say, AI generally is important in drug discovery or even development, but it doesn't take the place of, most of the things that we have to do. So if you look at it, generally it takes a couple of years sometimes even to do screening or targeting. But now with AI, there are actually reports of screening that includes virtual screening and discovery that has been done in months. In fact, there was an article I read the other week by a group that discovered a molecule in a week, right? So at the end of the day, it depends on the data of obviously that that it's being trained at. We can't put a specific number to say it's changed from this to that, but we know it's been dramatic. It's no longer taking years. In some cases, it takes months or it takes weeks to find a target.
And just in terms of acceleration, just to add to this, if you look at a great achievement like AlphaFold from Google DeepMind and what they've done in recent years from that early Nature paper when they came out with it, and even the work they've done since then, I mean, they could recalculate the entire PDB in the space of just a few weeks, if not months. And they've gone much beyond it. PDB is 250,000 proteins, but now they've basically gone into all the other species, and they can go into the millions of proteins for all the other species and calculate them theoretically, and then put them in a database. And it can be done more or less in weeks. And that's talking of acceleration and opening up science. It's an unbelievable democratization and opening up of new science that have been calculated by the computers, by the cloud compute underneath, and the AI methods they were using. And I might add a similar sort of big acceleration case that the CCDC was involved with, and that's crystal structure prediction. You could predict all the small molecules and how they crystallize using AI techniques. And we've worked with about 50 companies and lots of academics around the world for the last 2 years to run a crystal structure prediction blind test to test the best AI methods to predict crystal structure prediction. And from there, we can go from 1 million molecules to suddenly 100 million molecules, all new ones with new properties. And again, that's done in the space of 2 years. That was never, ever possible before.
So it sounds like a lot of the work has been on the sort of the start of the process, so identifying targets of interest. But do you think that this is going to then lead to, you know, once you've got an interesting target, does it actually lead to products getting onto the market faster? So is AI being used in other aspects, you know, through the whole of the life cycle?
Yeah, I think a good example is Recursion. So Recursion is a US-based rare disease company. And so what they are very strong in doing is that they use AI for drug repurposing. So they're taking existing drugs that are being used for treating other indications, and they've repurposed some of their drugs actually in the rare space. And they used AI to do that. Yeah, so we're seeing actual results, frankly, from it. So that's a very powerful actually use, and especially in the rare space, because rare space is so challenging. There are not that many treatments, and so to be able to take that, even from a regulatory point of view, you know the PK already of the drug. There's so many known things. It makes it just actually go faster, generally. So yeah, it's happening.
Maybe we could just end two things. So first of all, while coming up here, I'm trying to understand where are we in the big picture, and of course, I just want to remind ourselves and everyone that we are, of course, at the very beginning of this transformation, right? So we might not even know all the things that are going to happen. Probably as transformative as the invention of the electric engine or something. It's going to be applied in so many different fields. One thing that I also noted was I found really interesting that we're using sort of predictive coding to produce better tools, right? So we're not producing better outcomes, but we're also producing better tools that lead to better outcomes. And this was really interesting for me that now scientists who usually cannot, this was in a lab of a neuroscientist, they wanted to analyze their signals in a better way, so they usually would have engaged with a bioinformatician and they would have tried to develop code to analyze their data, but in this case they just did it themselves because there are so many generative technologies to generate code and even programs. And this has a much shorter turnover time, so you can test your code on your own data and then tweak it. And so your analysis methods are also speeding up, just as your outcome is being sped up by other methods. So I think it's so transformative that we will look back at this as before AI and after AI. This is the same time we look at before the invention of the electric engine or the invention of electricity. I think it's that deep of a transformation.
Absolutely.
I mean, so I think if we think about has AI helped to, you could say, find drugs for the coronavirus crisis, I would say probably the answer would be no. I mean, there's very quickly groups could prioritize about several dozens of compounds, but then the process of then validating that clinically was very poorly vested by governments and pharma companies. We focused more on the vaccine. So, which I think was a moment where we could have actually seen whose algorithm really works. And I guess for now the jury is still out. And I think what AI is doing is I think helping us to implement, say, this 3 R's principle, doing less animal research and going more quickly into humans, and actually FDA is even being open about that. So I think that's where the companies, I think, will invest more in leveraging legacy data and maybe a little more in silico computational platforms, even internal and external collaborations to try to, I guess, hopefully maybe bring more things up to, you could say, phase 2B and maybe even hopefully use some of that technology and you could say data leveraging to kill projects before they go into phase 3, which is what really runs the budgets of all. I mean, it's a costly bit because so we've got 2 costly bits in the pharmaceutical industry, right? It's the early bit that we're really not good at, that we're failing so much, and then the end bit that we do, it's expensive when you go press the green light for phase 3.
So on the phase 3 then, I guess it's what we can do as well is accelerate that piece so that it goes faster and costs less. And there's lots of things you can do there. So we can look at sort of predicting how the trial's going, so you can make decisions faster. But then we're getting to the point where it's like not just predicting what's going to happen, it's predicting or telling you what you should do about it, or not telling you, but suggesting maybe. And seeing then what those sorts of things to do and the outcomes you can have. So I think it certainly will accelerate our drug development. I
guess you're having patients put in potentially side effects and then computer meshing occurrences and you being able to, say, even maybe potentially find a biomarker or whatever through this sort of digital mining of people participating and putting in data.
There was something else that you said earlier around patient selection as well. That's interesting, because if you can get your endpoint set right and the patient population right, then you can need fewer patients, which is another big thing.
Or the right patients, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's like, it's you have patients, you have all these IE criteria, but making sure you can select the right patients, and AI is actually doing that. I mean, there's a company called Mendel AI, and they're actually pretty good at doing that. They will look at EHR data and look at other sources of data and help you actually stratify what they think the best patients should be for that particular study. And it's helpful, especially, again, if you look at things like rare disease where you're trying to find a needle in a haystack. It's extremely helpful to have that.
I think, on the timelines and maybe acceleration piece again, if we're thinking it's sort of, 5 to 10 years and 10 billion to produce a drug and go through all the stages from R to D to manufacturing to clinical trials, etc. I think it's helpful to think, there's so many companies now, Benevolent AI, Exensio, and I could list another 20, they're all on this, and they're using so many tools and methods and data sets now, and AI technologies, machine learning mainly. It's got to accelerate the entire process. There's no way we should be taking 10 years and taking 10 billion to get a drug on the market. I mean, the AI tools and new methods, they're going to hit at every single point. At the moment, at CCDC, we're looking at where does computational chemistry actually feature across everything from R to D to manufacturing. And if you're in, I talked about research already with sort of ultra high throughput docking and structural design there for drugs and rational drug designs based on knowledge and the rest of it, which is great. But then you get to manufacturing, you can do the risk analysis. So you can build a digital twin of your molecule, of your API, and you will know the entire risk profile already computationally before you even have to do any experiments. So you can save hundreds of millions with that right there. And you can shorten the time scale by X amount because you're not going to do another 100 experiments. You just have to home in on one. And so it's much more targeted and predicted and guided by AI, which is where I think we need to get to as humans. We need to use these tools in such a way that we use the right models for the right purpose to accelerate, to get to the answers quicker and have maybe the right predictive power of the model to the right data sets underneath. High quality data is absolutely essential.
Presumably then that this means that if it's taking less time and there's less money needed to actually run all these costly bits of getting a product onto the market, the cost to the consumer of the actual end result might be lower? Is that too controversial?
we hope. When you have a drug, we have drugs, gene therapy drugs in the US that cost $1 million, So we hope. We hope. We have to tell that to the pharma companies. Hopefully they'll
it's a good hope. If I can come in on this, it's a good hope to have. But if you look at the hundreds of millions of billions, and there's probably 30, 40, 50 billion invested in just the last 1 or 2 years in AI and all the new large language models. To run these models or to even train them for half a year already costs tens of millions. And then to operate them on a broad populace, hundreds of millions of people around the world, costs hundreds of millions. So it's not cheap, basically. So I'm not sure, unless we have more a democratization of all the AI tools for more people around the planet, where they can run it, in the garages rather than you have to be Google in order to run it. Then I'm not sure we're getting to the full power of it all.
Maybe it's fine that the societal benefit at this stage is that drugs actually get onto the market and are there for consumers faster than they would be otherwise. And then maybe the cost savings come later in time, hopefully, fingers crossed. What we've touched on briefly already is that you need data in order to actually build, train and run an AI or a machine learning model in order for it to make predictions, perform the analysis that you want it to perform and so on. So what sort of data are you seeing being used to actually build the models that you've seen?
So I can start. I think some of the data that's used obviously from public databases, genomics data, proteomics data, data from literature is being used. sometimes company data, if they have internal data, also is being used.
Yeah, I mean, the data, I guess, different domains. Every domain has their data sets underneath. I can speak for structural science and chemistry and biology in that case. The Cambridge Structural Database took about 60 years to build, and tens of thousands of scientists from around the world from 200 countries. Everything came off the X-ray machines, and it took that long. And then probably over those 60 years, there's probably 1,000 people who worked on it in terms of data quality control. If you think, people coming and going over 60 years, 120 at the moment, but we're adding all the extra data layers on top and the higher quality control beyond what's first come off the machines. So that quality control is absolutely essential. Because I have one thing to say, if you put garbage into an AI model, whatever flavor model, you'll get garbage out 1,000 times faster. And that doesn't help anybody. So you need good data in and a great model, and you have to have the right parameters of the model to understand what will be its predictive power and what can and can't it answer, and then you're getting some better results, shall we say.
I think you're probably a poster child for what it means to have good, high-quality data, right? And I think in our domain, it's quite the challenge. So I think also in terms of cost, some of the cost has just been shifted, right, to the data curation, to the data harmonization part, which is also for many people a new challenge, right? People were used to dealing with their data sets, maybe that of their collaborators, and that's where they drew their insights from. So now you want to do large meta-analyses or integrate lots of data from different sources, and suddenly you're faced with different challenges that you aren't really well equipped to. So some of that cost that we might save is going to a different part. Now, interestingly, of course, you can also use maybe large language models to help harmonize your data, because that's basically a semantic, a curation problem. So this is also techniques that are being now deployed, is to help use some of these semantic tools to help you harmonize your data from different sources. But still, as everyone will acknowledge, right, the quality of the data is key. And in some cases, data standards exist. In other cases, data standards do not exist. And until now, so in our area, we have been aware, the field has been aware that data standards don't exist for at least a decade, but there hasn't really been a strong impetus to tackle it, right? Because they said, well, we'll just do it on our own. Now, if you say, okay, the benefits of having standardized data are much bigger because you could much quicker run these sophisticated tools on them, we're hoping that this will catalyze the acceptance of data standards and help encourage people to say, okay, it's actually worthwhile investing the effort into standardizing your data so that it actually matches a certain set of minimal criteria. I think this is, and there's even academic research, which I found fascinating, being done into sort of setting data standards, which is usually not the strong domain of an academic, right? But this is these signs are encouraging, but I still think right now they are actually one of the biggest blocks to innovation, is that the standard data aren't of the right quality.
So I think in sort of data models in say preclinical and clinical space, I think the Broad Institute L1000 data sets quite used to in silico, in vitro-based phenotypic screening approach, I think. And I think then companies find themselves that there's a lack of in vivo phenotypic screens like that that are done, say, even healthy animals, something that we did in our company, focus on healthy animals. But generally, most researchers focus on a disease model, just one single time point, or a human disease model, one single time point. And I think we're only going to make the next leap of, you could say, predictive power that we now have with the computing and models that are already there, only when we have, you could say, trajectories of a process where you have even at least 2-3 time points from the same area, rather than taking one time point from 100 areas. Is not going to be as informative as several time points from one area. I believe so, and I think that's when the companies that are going to lead AI, you could say, results are going to be ones that have access to such data.
And if I could add one thing on the international data standards, it's so important. And we've been sort of in this game of setting the international standards for structural science for years. At the moment, I don't know if people are familiar with the sort of FAIR principles, findable, accessible, interoperable, retrievable, or reproducible. That I would say that a lot of the pharma players and pharma companies, they're all on their individual FAIR journeys, and they're at a different level of FAIR readiness, shall we say. But I would argue that pretty much everybody has to get up that mountain of get the best FAIR principles going with their data, any data they hold, whether it's R or D or whatever. Because you need, it's not, the humans have to get to the data and understand what the data is, but the machines have to do the same. So if the machines can't understand what we're dealing with because the standards aren't there, it's suboptimal. So you have to push the best standards. And the FAIR, if you're not familiar with the FAIR principles, if you look at that, I will tell you a lot in terms of what the gold standard would be.
And I think it's really important to look at, essentially the end buyer is going to be the pharma. So it's really important to make sure that whatever assay you're using is an assay they buy into. And I think one way for, say, very early stage companies to obtain such data is to actually liaise with NIH translational services. They actually have that for many diseases like epilepsy, and they actually, you can send them or suggest compounds and they'll generate data for you, to which then you can apply for IP and then go through the commercialization process. So I think that's, it's really important to think about what your end buyer is actually, what they believe is a good endpoint for them, rather than just spend money on generating some data. I mean, when you generate data, make sure you know why you're generating it.
It's interesting that you've mentioned data standardization. I wasn't aware of this. And it sort of resonates with me a little bit, because I work, a lot in the sort of wireless communication space, and there are very clear standards in that space. If you work in mobile technologies, you know that there are standards, and so it's interesting to hear that so those sorts of principles and that harmonization is sort of occurring starting to occur in the life sciences space. But just sort of thinking about big tech for a moment. One of the things that I know from working with the companies that I typically work with is that the larger organizations tend to be the ones that have the better data sources or the databases. Maybe it's because they have lots of customers that they can obtain that data from in the first place. Maybe it's because they have a lot of cash, so they can actually just go and buy the data that they need. And it's a little bit of a, as has been touched on, the person or the company that has the data may have the better model. So are you seeing the same sort of thing play out in the life sciences sector, where the bigger organizations maybe have a bit more clout or power or better models because of the data that they hold?
Well, I think, like some of the public databases, like the proteomics and genomics or the drug databases are available. So it might be a bit different, I think, in this regard, because they have the same type of access, right? I think where it becomes a bit different is if the company, the pharmaceutical company, for example, is working in a particular therapeutic area, or they have a certain pipeline or portfolio of drugs, and so they know that drug better than most people, then maybe they'll have an advantage, right? But generally, even smaller companies or smaller organizations can get access to proteomics data, the literature, or the drug databases, unless it's something that's really, like I said, more specialized, where the pharmaceutical company has an edge because they have history or they have a portfolio, then you will see some differences with that. But generally, it's not, the barriers are not as high in terms of that access to that kind of data.
I think just to maybe add to this, if you're thinking about the last few decades on sort of the advances in bioinformatics and all the open data, open access, and you look at the whole infrastructure from the EBI, for example, around all of Europe or the world, you can get to most of the biology data, genomics data, all these things are open access, open source. On the cheminformatics, molecular informatics side, it used to be, or it's a bit more closed. You have chemical abstract services, even arguably CCDC. We're on a trajectory to go more and more open, but cheminformatics has this kind of 100-year history where things were a little bit more contained in terms of, behind licenses and the rest of it. But it's, again, I think that is changing because it needs to, because the AI models or the machinery, it has to have the access to the data. So you just need to evolve the license models.
And what about things like patient data? So patient data is extremely valuable in working out, maybe who the right set of people are in order to actually perform a trial, or to work out, trends or things to focus on, and so on. How do you access patient data?
So we use patient data. We have a lot of patient data in AstraZeneca, but we also partner with other people who have vast sort of databases, I guess, of data. So I think you can never have enough data. Is the trouble. And I was thinking, if you think about ChatGPT, right, it's trained on the internet, right? It's the everything. It's trained on everything. So you can never have too little data. So the more you can get, the better. But the other thing with patient data, though, is there's obviously challenges with consent. You have to be very careful what you use it for, what you don't use it for. So you need a whole bunch of sort of systems and processes and things around that to make sure that you're doing the right thing with the data.
I think that just opens up a really interesting question, because I think our concept of consent probably arose at a time where data reuse wasn't that prevalent. Right? So I was talking to a company that you know, I don't want to name, I don't want to throw them on the bus, and they found out that a lot of their internal data could not be used for what they wanted to use it for, and some of these patients had died. So what do you do then? Right? It's valuable data. And why not be able to draw new inferences in a different, for drug repurposing or whatever? So I think maybe we might even have to rephrase our data consent policies conceptually as a society. If we say it's anonymized and you know we treat it fairly and it's for the advancement of science, why not? I mean, that's a conversation we need to have, I think, in a society. So I think these are really new challenges that we might not even have predicted that all this AI revolution is bringing.
I think also in the drug development space, in all fairness, I mean, I also have a CRO background. You know, many times when we're even getting patient data, a lot of the data that we get to help us make decisions in terms of planning or identifying patients, a lot of this data is already anonymized, frankly. And there are many large organizations that provide this type of EHR data, for example, but most of it is anonymized. So there's some level of protection, you know, in getting that type of data as well.
I think it's very interesting. A big difference here in terms of dealing with patient data and people's data on the clinical trial end versus, say, if you're at the research end or development, you're looking at just molecules. That's quite a different thing. The thing I care a lot about is the data quality again, and actually evidence-based facts. I think we need to get back to this much stronger, because the risk now with all these large language models from ChatGPT, Bing AI, or Bard, Google, or Meta Llama. I mean, there's 100 of them at the moment, but they all start hallucinating because they make data up. They you know, if you're a domain expert and you look at this and you feed them the thing and you ask some questions, you're getting stuff back that's just blatantly wrong. So there's a real risk that we're generating more and more data, but actually potentially completely wrong stuff. And I think that we're going to talk about regulations later, presumably, but regulation needs to be looked at, because we have to have the right level and we have to have the right evidence-based checkpoints in there to validate this stuff. Because otherwise, I mean, I think you might have already seen this when you type your own things in, but these models, they hallucinate. They can hallucinate. And that's pretty risky. Because if you feed it back to the internet and you train the next version of the next large language model with the wrong data from the one before, you spin it further forward, you get model collapse. And that's pretty poor. So
just converges to nonsense, really.
Yeah, and nobody wants that.
I'm just going to sort of ask the audience, actually. So has anybody here in this room, is anyone working in this space where you're trying to obtain data, and maybe you're trying to obtain patient data from the NHS? Raise your hands if you are trying to do anything, actually, with the NHS. Very few people. And is that because you're not at that point where you don't really care about that sort of type of data, or is it because the NHS is so unwieldy, no one can be bothered?
You have to know the right person in NHS to think about that approach. I think in terms of patient data, there's a lot of non-compliance of not publishing clinical results. I think that's missed opportunities for anybody who wants to turn data into knowledge, which I think is where we're at.
And I guess just sort of thinking aloud and thinking of some of the people I've been working with, you know,
that is digital accelerators, the NHS theoretically.
Yes.
You can try to go through these, but
but yeah, I guess there's quite a lot of valuable data in just NHS records in terms of how people's diseases progress over time. They might not be enrolled in a trial, but you can see how things happen over time. So that sort of time series data exists, but in an unaccessible place, perhaps, maybe. So we've sort of mentioned regulation. Some of you might be aware of the EU AI Act, which is going to come into effect in not too long. And the EU is sort of leading the way in this, but it's expected that other jurisdictions will soon follow with acts in the AI space. And obviously, some of what they're talking about here is, covering lots of different aspects of AI, from autonomous vehicles to the healthcare space. But the underlying fundamental principle is that the AI needs to be explainable and transparent in some way. So you need to be able to explain how it works, what it does, what data it was trained on, and so on. Is that something that companies are currently thinking about and getting ready to do? Because it's not too long now where we're going to have to start showing this explainability and transparency and so on.
Yes, I mean I'm seeing more push towards that. I mean the FDA has a guidance as well that it has given an AI and software as a service, digital health, etc. So I think you're seeing more and more of the push, because it becomes also a bit of an ethical issue, right? Being able to demonstrate and show where your data is coming from. So I would say yes. I think more and more companies are becoming aware that they need to do that for many reasons, including ethical issues.
I think if you talk about the clients that we work with, it's potentially an ethical issue, but also a trust issue. They just want to know themselves, how does this work? And so I think that there's a big impetus on sort of work called a white box. I mean, in the end, I think it will all rest on validation, because, I mean, in essence, some part of me says, I don't really care how the results were proven. I just want to know that it works, and you test it on the validation side. But of course, that raises other questions. So I think there was a comment this morning by I think Kate from Genomics England about transparency and openness, and I found that actually very nice. Transparent is one thing where you could publish the paper, but how accessible is that? And if you try to make it open, it means, or in her words or in these words, it means it becomes understandable, and you can sort of engage with that. So I think these are maybe very interesting concepts that maybe become more and more important now that we are dealing with so much data. Is that how do you actually understand rather than just do?
I think, and just building on that, I mean, I really like that comment from Kate in terms of openness and transparency, because you can be transparent, but then if it's some sort of hyper-complicated model that nobody gets, I mean, you can transparently beam it somewhere, but if no one gets it, it's not really open and understood. So I think it needs to be this sort of white box approach. We can't have black boxes everywhere where nobody knows what the models are doing. The models need to be understood, version controlled, they need to be validated, they need to be fed golden test sets of data so that you can see what the input is and then the output, and you can just validate it all. Otherwise, I mean, somebody says they're using AI, but they can't explain the thing. I mean, you really have to start asking a lot more questions right there, because, smoke and mirrors, and it's nobody needs that. So it needs to be rock solid, because we're going to make key decisions with this in life sciences. I mean, who wants to design or build a drug with black box models everywhere? I mean,
I think probably it's different business to business and business to consumer. If you go in business to consumer, I think you've got to be a lot more responsible. Even if you look at Babylon Health, if you look at the history of it not having some, you could say, following some basic guidelines of how diseases should be diagnosed was not a good thing when it came out. But so I think it's, as you go closer to human applications, you need to be a lot more responsible. If you don't explain your model in some abstract way, nobody's going to buy it anyway. So I think.
I mean, I totally welcome the effort to try and regulate or have various AI acts coming in around the planet. But I guess each nation will have to figure out what is the right level of regulation, all that sort of thing. So it'll be different from nation to nation. But it has to be looked at, because it's a huge opportunity. But we need to go for responsible usage and understand the thing. Because you can't just discover fire and suddenly let it all go crazy.
Well, I think one is sort of, you've got regulation guidance, and then you've got what they call the FANGs. would be now Meta, but Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, and Google, who then define their own rules or the guidances. I mean, sort of often, it's sort of the big tech deciding to go, and who really has to lead the way, and you could say implementation and even acceleration of some of these tools. Because at the end of the day, I think the model is built to exit, that you end up having a big player who has the infrastructure to deliver it to the consumer. And I think that's how most businesses are built to, and hopefully, I think that some of the big pharma companies have solutions that are being kept locked because they just wouldn't be profitable for them to roll out. And I think we hopefully will not see too much of that in the future.
I mean, maybe there's a slight other angle. I don't know whether we get to that in terms of the talent and the humans and the understanding of us as humans who are quite creative. I think we should stay in control of this process. And I would say, if you picture a chemist in 5 years' time, let's picture two people who work in laboratories or whatever the future lab will look like. It'll look very different compared to where we are now. The person who has adopted the AI tools and works with the best data and workflows and automation will obviously be clearly the better scientist compared to the person who didn't. Chances are the person who doesn't adopt any of these things isn't actually working there in 5 years' time. So, but my argument is it needs to be a healthy symbiosis between machine and human. If we don't get that right, we have a real societal problem, I would argue. So irrespective of the domain, not just life sciences, but any domain gets touched by this.
Maybe even broader, because that's why I think this is maybe a challenge to all of us. So how much do we want to be involved as a society in these decisions? And I don't have the answer. I think we had this discussion in the beginning. Where do ethics come in? So if you're talking about medical recommendations, so what happens with the trust? If your doctor recommends something and it goes wrong, wow, so who takes responsibility for that? I think we're really entering a new time where some of these decisions we have sort of outsourced, right, for better or for worse. If I just was talking to a clinician the other day, and I think there are 70 different treatment modalities for some types of cancer. So who can make that decision? Which one are you doing? So they are relying on models and on data analysis, and then one is picked out of those 70, and then you follow that. But what if it turns out to be the wrong one? Who is responsible? And are we comfortable with saying, well, no one is responsible?
So I think that's really important. So at AstraZeneca, we have some responsible AI principles which are published, and that we follow, and the accountability is one of those aspects. I think that's very important. And I also agree with the human element as well of a human being in the loop, essentially, on the decision making. So it's not always, it's not just a complete black box. There's someone checking and making sure that everything is okay.
I have to agree as well. I think I was also going to say that with anything related to AI, there has to be a good governance structure as well. That's really critical. If you're going to use AI, you must have some good governance even within your organization that gives you a human oversight framework to make sure that you can measure what you are getting from an ethical point of view, and also from even a regulatory compliance point of view and human interest point of view.
So my last question, I think, is, it's great that we're all sort of, thinking about using or currently using all these AI tools, but life sciences companies have traditionally had life sciences graduates working in them, or life sciences expertise. So how are you attracting the talent you need in order to actually build these models and do all of this work? And how do you compete with the Googles and the Amazons and so on of this world who are paying megabucks to all the computer scientists coming out of universities?
Well, they usually actually, I get unsolicited questions if people could work for me, at least. And these people that have gone through BRAINCURES, they're very talented. But in the future, we'll see. I mean, I think the way my business model is, we're essentially going to be working through collaborative partnerships. So I think it's not going to be our problem, not that big of a problem for us.
It's a little different for us. I mean, if I look at, we're in the middle of Cambridge, so we're surrounded by, Meta, Amazon, everyone, Microsoft Research, they're all there. And of course, they're all after these top graduates that know anything about statistics or mathematics or anything else. But let's face it, I mean, if you look at a subject like crystallography, it's multi-domain. So it's physics, it's optics, it's mathematics, it's statistics. you have all the different domains in there. So what you have to do, you have to tell an attractive story. And in our case, we try and do that. And then we fund postdocs and PhDs, and we run various projects for several years with all the UK universities, now Europe and US as well. We're trying to get to the Far East, to just actually go after the global talent pool and run a few projects, let them build the models, give them the data, give them the access, test some projects, obviously have our own experts and scientists on it. And then out of all of that, we can actually train people up and then recruit them. So that's, I think everyone needs some sort of sophisticated training program as well to kind of adapt to what's coming next.
Money and training.
And maybe the other thing is your mission. I think you have to be very clear about what you're trying to achieve with your company. And I think for someone who goes to Facebook, that might be something else than someone who joins maybe Eagle Genomics, where we actually want to have a positive impact on the lives of people in a sustainable way and help our customers become more sustainable. So I think it's that storytelling around other bigger values than just maybe your own paycheck. Not that having a paycheck isn't important, but I think we do live in a connected society, and I think what Krzysztof was saying as well, we have to collaborate, and we do with partners, but we also have to propose our own vision and our own values.
Awesome. So I've been told that we have no more time. So thank you very much for answering all those excellent questions and providing your insights. We also unfortunately don't have any time for audience questions, but the coffee break is in 50 minutes or so, 40 minutes.
Yes. Squeezing the next one.
Most of us, or many of us, will be around then, so feel free to reach out to us then. But please join me in thanking the excellent panelists.